Welcome to Agency Acquisitions and Exits. I'm your host, Peter Lang. Today's guest is Kevin Gibbons, founder of ReSignal, one of UK's most respected SEO agencies. Kevin started his entrepreneurial journey more than 20 years ago. He was in his early 20s, navigating a founder split. He had to rebuild his company from scratch, scaled it to an award-winning agency. He completed an acquihire, which we talk about, and how that's such a valuable first transaction. He was growing his clients, growing his notoriety in the agency and service world. And then he recently closed his first, what we call real acquisition, which we unpack. But what makes Kevin's story unique is the evolution of his thinking. He was a practitioner, accidental agency owner, to then agency leader, now to capital allocator, focused on creating long-term value through acquisitions and strategic growth. Today, we're talking about his partnerships, his breakups, M&A, integration, and why chasing an exit can sometimes be the thing that prevents you from building a great business. Let's dive in. Kevin, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Peter.
Okay, so take us back to 2006 because you've been on this journey for a while.
Yeah, so 2006, it would have been a recent grad. I'd done a year's placement at a web design agency and learned such a range of different skills, obviously at a junior level, in terms of web development, web design, and this new thing called SEO. And SEO was the thing that stuck. So I tried a few different things. And I think because I had that combination of skills, I was in a good place where I could build a website, I could design it, and then I could do the SEO in terms of marketing and getting traffic. And that felt like a really nice combination of skills to then be able to say, okay, well, back then it was more, how do I build my own affiliate websites? And then they became my first case studies in terms of talking about what I'd achieved and proven that I can do this. And then off the back of those case studies, I won clients and day by day kind of realized, wait a minute, this is an agency. So yeah, it's never, in my mind, it was never a grand plan. It's just an evolution of curiosity that's led down a rabbit hole that I've continued with 20 years later.
Yeah, the grand old days of good SEO, 2006, 2007, 2008.
Yeah, loved
the
it.
early days. It spoils you with rankings. What did you go into university education thinking you were going to do professionally before becoming an accidental agency owner?
Originally sort of IT and computing. I then figured out I wasn't all that good at the technical side, and I switched to a course that was a mix of business and computing. And looking back, it's actually quite interesting. It's like e-commerce was one of the modules. Accounting was one of the modules that probably didn't interest me that much. It was quite useful when you run an agency after a while to figure out how to have some money in the bank and all of that sort of stuff.
So you're saying you literally studied the things that you ended up doing as your profession?
Weirdly, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
that sounds quite rare.
Who does that, Kevin?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not sure I realized it at the time, but yeah, I think looking back, it is interesting that, like I say, I built my own websites, got some of them to rank on Google. I made some money back in the day from Google AdSense, and like all of that was a spin-off of some of the stuff that I was learning. And like I say, that placement year was invaluable in terms of just chucking me into an agency and seeing how it ticks.
What did success look like in those early days? Freedom, money, personal and professional growth?
I was going to say beer money. It was, like I say, student, and it was kind of like, okay, well, this pays for a Friday night. I love that, like I say, the kind of the naivety of getting started when I was 23, 24. You don't have the pressures of a mortgage and kids and everything else that comes with it. It was literally like, I had a very low income, very low spend, and I could make that work. And like I say, follow that curiosity without too much financial pressure. So it really took the weight off in terms of just being at that stage and being able to run with it. And to me, if I made $2 the day before, that was something to celebrate, because it's like I just loved seeing, okay, well, I've done something, and now in the Google AdSense, I can see that that's worked. And tomorrow I might make $2.50. And like I say, it's compounds over time, right?
When did it switch from this, I'm happy to make a few dollars for a pint, to what you would maybe define as a real business effort?
I got a web development job out of uni. And like I say, I think I had this realization that SEO was the thing that I really enjoyed. I built affiliate websites on the side. My realization was, and this was in 2006, I'd equaled my salary with my side projects. And I'd, at that point, realized, okay, well, if I do the student thing and go to Australia for a year, which is what I did, I can still have my salary. And that felt like a very nice safety net to say, okay, well, let's do this. And worst case, I come back and I get a job, but
Yeah.
I've got enough to keep me going without necessarily saying I have to have a huge amount of savings and then eat away at it. I've got enough that I could do this sustainably for a year and then see where I end up.
Don't give too much gap year hope to people, Kevin, that they can
I
have a
know.
salary on a gap year.
Yeah. Back then, I'm not sure what it is. I haven't actually been back to Australia, which is a shame. I'd love to go back. But the Australian dollar, I think it was something like a pound was 40 cents. Is that the right way around? No, the other way around. So
Other
a
way around,
dollar was 40p. And so I was earning UK money, which again wasn't a ton, but it was enough. In Australia, that actually went really far.
Yeah. And so you come back from Australia and you double down on SEO, an agency.
Right. Yeah.
What'd that look like? Show us the early days. Who was with you in the room?
2006 to 2007 was me in Australia on a laptop working with some clients and affiliate websites. And like I say, I built up case studies that turned into clients while I was away. Everyone just thought I worked crazy hours. And a lot of it back then, 2006, you didn't really have fast Wi-Fi video calls. A lot of it was just over email. And I made that work. My plan, like I say, was to come back and get a job. And I'm from Oxford at that stage. I don't think I've even thought of moving to London. That didn't feel like it's on the cards. I did that later down the line. There weren't really many Oxfordshire agencies. And when I got back, I had a couple of meetings with someone that had just left a local Oxfordshire business that was quite keen and learning on the Google Ads side of things. I was doing the SEO side of things. And we decided, okay, well, let's do this together. I already had a website with a agency brand name. Back then it's SEO Optimize. And between the two of us, we took that into being a limited company. We worked together from his kitchen table for a good 6 months, if not 12 months before having an office. And then one local clients, it turned into national clients, it turned into global clients. And like I say, that's certainly not an overnight story, but that's where it ended up. And yeah, it's kind of from those early days, like I say, Australia and then back to Oxford, and that realization that actually I didn't need a job, I had one.
That's amazing. When you started making money, having a business partner, starting to make commitments, building a team, you and I had talked about you and your partner ultimately split, but a split doesn't happen overnight. So what started to happen in the business that made a separation between business partners the outcome?
So we split in 2012, and I would say we had very strong growth, almost like probably doubling every year between 2006 and 2010. That was great. I think things were going really well. We were like Deloitte Fast 50 awarded, like all of that stuff. That again, we were in a strong position. I think there were just a number of different things that felt like, for me, we were leaving an opportunity on the table to then continue that growth. So we didn't go backwards. We potentially still grew, but it was kind of like much slower growth than we'd seen before that point. And for me, it's a series of different things, both personal and professional. I think on the professional side, it was we'd opened a small office in London. We'd saw a lot of the growth coming from London in terms of where the clients were located, because that's obviously where a lot of companies in the UK have their head offices, and it's where a lot of global companies might have their UK or European offices. And I certainly saw a shift towards that. Equally, I think I found that a lot of the thought leadership stuff that I was doing, where I'd considered myself to be an SEO practitioner, I think I then realized, okay, wait a minute, what I'm doing, not just doing the work and then talking about it in terms of writing articles, blogging, speaking at events, conferences, became, I would say, our biggest channel in terms of where new clients came from as well. And at that point, I probably wanted to go into a different direction, probably more inbound in terms of how we grow, less outbound sales. And like I say, there's not one big thing I could put it down to, but there were like differences on how we wanted to operate and run the business. And personally, I went through a position where my dad sadly died of cancer in 2012, which was the year that we split. So it's one of those where looking back, I made a call to get out, probably because I wasn't enjoying it. And looking back, it's like, well, no wonder I wasn't enjoying it. It didn't even have to be the professional stuff I've just mentioned. It was the personal stuff. And I think there's a trend of when business is hard for me, it's not the economic climate. It's not, there's issues with clients. It's managing your personal life alongside a business for me has been like, that's the biggest challenge to be able to do. And like I say, I'm not even sure now I could honestly give you the right answer on was the right thing to do to leave the business in 2012. Like even now, it's really hard to say. And I think at the time I wasn't sure either, but I was kind of like, I'm not enjoying this. And I need to find a way out. And so I negotiated a way that I could take the London office that literally had, I think it's 4 members of staff, a handful of clients, and we split some cash in half and we went different ways.
I hear in that something that I hear in a lot of businesses, which is the business is what's expected, hard work, but it gets extra hard when something on the personal side outweighs the stress of being an entrepreneur and running your own business.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you have that conversation a lot with founders who maybe do not have a business partner, but they feel that way. Something's happening in their personal lives. The business is just too much for them. And they are looking for a way to safely transition the business, the team, because they're not at a state mentally to focus on it. And it may not be clear. Like you're describing it quite accurately, and hindsight's 2020.
Of course.
But in the moment, you're just like, I'm fed up.
Yeah, and I'm
it's
also
hard.
Not the type of person to sit around and not do anything like that. To me, emotionally, if you like, I think I'd be worse off. I need to be quite forward facing, action driven. What do we do next? And just have something to do. So it's kind of like, okay, well, that was the point in time. It's like, okay, well, this is quite freeing to be able to say, okay, this is now my company. It's much smaller. And what do I do to take this forward? And like I said, I think it took a number of years to really get back to even where we were previously, but it was quite freeing to be able to say, okay, well, this is now the direction I want to take it. And I've always loved this reverse way of looking at it sometimes of like, if everything goes wrong, it's all my fault. I really like that because it's like, you've got no one to blame. There's no excuses. I'm just going to go for this and let's see where it ends up.
We talked about with what you know now, if you could go back in time, you would have bought your business partner out.
I would have at least had a conversation and tried to.
Yeah. So let's maybe unpack that. Why was the default, we just have to separate versus figuring out a way for one of you to buy the other out?
I don't think I'd even considered that. We'd had questions around, do we continue to grow the business for a few years and sell it? And again, I was kind of like, well, that year might become 2 years, it becomes 5 years. And I kind of made up my mind. I wanted to do something different. I don't think I'd ever considered, certainly from a financial perspective, what it would look like if I was to buy the business and what that would look like to maybe have different payments over time and not have to have lots of cash day one, or like I say, kind of now knowing the financial modeling that would go into that type of deal and acquisition, if you like. Like I say, in hindsight, it's certainly something I feel like I should have explored. Like I said, I don't know if that would have worked. It might not have, but certainly with what I know now, it would be an avenue to certainly pursue.
As we kind of bookend this part of the story, what advice would you have for a founder who currently is navigating a difficult partner situation like that?
I think it is really tricky because every circumstance is different. And like I say, I kind of stayed amicable in terms of it's not a personal fallout. It's kind of more professionally kind of wanted to go different directions or just didn't quite see it working in the same way. I think my first thought is try and keep it amicable. First step is always, in my mind, try and find a way to make it work. And I think that's probably the way I approached it first off. It's kind of, like I say, these things don't happen overnight. But then if you have made that call to say, okay, I want to go a different direction, I think it's surround yourself with people that have done that before. I know I've given advice to people since who have really valued me just sharing my experience and my learnings. And the more that you know that, I felt the deal we did was done almost like a divorce. It wasn't really done in a corporate sort of way. And I think if I was surrounded by advisors who had been through those types of situations, certainly agents' experience, all of that, I think it would have certainly had a bit more of an impact. So yeah, don't rush into it. Speak to people who've been there and done it. It's not new. This happens all the time. Um, and yeah, just like I say, sometimes it's being prepared for different scenarios as well. Because like I say, like if I went back in time, I might not be able to change that outcome. So you almost have to look at what are the different scenarios and what's your walk away point, and kind of then work backwards from there, really.
So after the split, you essentially became the phoenix rising from the ashes. You have this new journey. It's 100% owned by you.
Yep.
What was going to be different about this next version of your professional career in the agency?
I think the reason I had a business partner in 2007 is I hadn't run a business before. And it's almost felt like a bit of a black box of this business skill set that you need to run a company, and what is a limited company in the UK and what is payroll. So I think second time around, I was armed with some knowledge of that. I'd still say I probably kept my distance first time around, because like I say, I saw myself as a bit of an SEO practitioner that led into the external voice of the agency, not necessarily the business side of, like I say, like accounting and all of that. Like we had accountants, but like the numbers to me was secondary at that point. And I think there was a bit of a growing up of, hey, wait a minute, I need to understand how we have cash in the bank, and I can't just go away and spend a load of money because our revenue is a lot lower than it used to be, and we can't just hire everyone that we want and, like I say, attend all of these events or whatever. Like all of this stuff costs money. I think it was, there's a positive side, which was the freeing. Okay, I can do everything that I want now, but I think it also came with a reality check of you still have to do it within the constraints of running a business, and there is a real world out there. Yeah, like I say, it's like we've never been funded. We've always been, like I say, independently owned, but self-funded along the way through our own profits. So that was a bit of a wake-up call. I think, again, it's I don't think that first or second year, in my mind, went as well as expected. I think we grew from a low base. I think we still did the double in size every year for 2 or 3 years, but it probably took us 3 years to get back to where we were pre-split. And then I think we grew beyond that, but probably hit a bit of a ceiling as well. So yeah, I think it wasn't all roses in terms of what we were doing, but equally it was a bit like what I said before. I'm in control of this, and there's only one way out. It's that whole no one's gonna come save you sort of thing. And like I say, like I said, stuff like this takes time, and I think that's probably my biggest learning, is that it's not that we were on the wrong path back then. I think we did a lot of really good stuff, but it takes a while for that to pay off, and you're building a new reputation again with a new brand name and stuff that, again, it's like starting point second time around is much stronger because it's a personal network, all of that stuff, but it still doesn't mean that you carry on where you left off.
During that period, a lot of independent SEO agencies were getting acquired. You probably saw that around you. Was that informing your decision around what you were building towards?
Absolutely. Yeah, I saw left, right, and center. It's kind of independent SEO agencies were getting bought. Back then, the model was from the media agencies, and you'd obviously get off the multiple a profit. And back then, quite long earnouts, like 4 years, something like that. It's kind of quite normal. And I think I probably bought into that in the sense of, okay, well, that's what we'll do next, because that's a natural thing that you do. You hit a certain size and then you sell. And we've had offers along the way and conversations. And I don't think we'd ever quite reached a size and scale where it felt like we were at that point. I think some of the independents that I mentioned, some of our competitors were a bit bigger than us in terms of what they did, or what the point that they sold. And as time's gone on, I think the model's changed. I think there's certainly been a few war stories in terms of how well those acquisitions have gone now that I've seen the other side of it. And I think also, yeah, it's a realization of actually what is it that we're working towards. I'm not sure. I think back then I was potentially too obsessed in the future. How do we get to that point and then we exit, as opposed to let's just build a great business today.
So date this for us. What point was it when you realized like chasing an exit was actually starting to hurt your enjoyment of this entrepreneurial journey?
Such a good question. There's a big turning point for me running an agency, which is when I attended a business growth program at Cranfield University, which is a very popular business school in the UK. For me, that was a point where I realized I almost wouldn't have a business if we were to carry on the way that we were going. So we'd had quite strong growth. We then hit a point where we really didn't do very well. So we went from £1.2 million revenue to about 600K within a year. We'd lost quite a few clients. Again, personal situation largely behind that. And that was quite a difficult period in terms of where we got to. Alongside that, there was a agency that had just received private equity funding and would have been interested in acquiring us, but frankly, our numbers were too low that unless they were going to give us an insane multiple, it just wouldn't make sense. And I think alongside that, the business growth program kind of then made me realize, wait a minute, this is a wake-up call. At the moment, you're almost sleepwalking into, you're not going to sell, you're going to go bust. And like I say, and that was like 2018, 2019. So that was actually quite a while into the business where, like I said, I think we've had some really good times up until that point. I think it was that period 6 or 7 years ago where it's like, let's forget about what everyone else has done and let's focus on what we need to do right now. And it was literally like zero-based budgeting. Let's go through what we need to spend and let's now change that cash flow forecast into a negative where you're going quite deep into an overdraft, into a positive where you're building up cash reserves. And that's what we did. And we've executed that plan, I would say, extremely well since that point in time. But that was a massive wake-up call. And that was a, like, get your head out of the future or wherever it might be into you need to be taking action right now.
Such a strange dichotomy to have the conversations around selling the business and then be feeling turmoil in the business in regards to performance, nothing that you felt yet.
Yep.
And then you go and learn kind of what you need to do to professionalize and focus on the company. You talked about, budgeting and forecasting. Anything else that you learned from that would be helpul?
I
learned things that you still do today?
We had a lunch, me and an advisor, with a potential acquirer that wanted, like I say, to bring in an SEO agency. And I think something that I've learned and listened to your podcast with Dom Hawes, and again, it's not about the price, it's about the terms. We got offered a high 7-figure valuation for the company, which I know felt very unachievable because it was linked to a very tough forecast. And I think that was something where it's like, when we actually unpicked the numbers and we looked at what we would need to achieve in order to get to that valuation and what they would pay for us if we were to achieve that outcome, our financial director looked at it and just said, well, you might as well keep the company, because the amount of cash that you would be generating for driving that performance, you would almost make most of that back in profit, and you would have a company that's worth a lot more than what they would be paying for you at that point in time. Yeah. So again, I think, like I say, don't be obsessed with the exit, I think is my learning, but actually be aware of it. What is it you're working backwards from or towards in terms of, and that might not even be the outcome, but knowing the value creation that you have along that journey, I think is an important thing to know, but also the red flags and what these deal structures look like and how it can work in one favor or the other. Again, I think can be pretty useful to be armed with.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think that you were going to work harder for someone else to accomplish the purchase price they put in front of you in the terms expectation than you were willing to work for yourself and own all the business and get the value later. That's an interesting aha moment to have before you start doubling down on the business.
Absolutely.
Anything else you learned from those sell side conversations that helped you focus on growing the company versus selling it?
I've always stayed fairly close to competitors, and most of the competitors in our space that we've sold, I've had a lunch with or something when they've kind of got out of their earnout phase, and always had quite honest conversations with them on what went well and what didn't. And I found that extremely valuable, because at that point, they're no longer a competitor, and we've always had a strong relationship in terms of how, like I say, like you never, when you're competing with someone, you're never going to tell them 100% of, oh yeah, we just pitched for them. Like that doesn't make sense. But transparently sharing and admitting that you're on that journey together, and like I say, kind of you get more out if you are transparently sharing the other way around. I think being open in that way has helped. And then, like I say, I kind of probably had a bit more of the warts and all stories from some people, some very good, some very bad, and a few in between. And that's the reality of how these things work.
We're halfway through this journey with you, and we haven't even got to the acquisition stage.
Yep.
So I want to make sure we jump to it, because I think it's important for note that you are having conversations with peers. You've seen all this around you, so you know the M&A vocabulary.
Of course.
You're having conversations with companies that look like yours, competitors, friendly competitors. How did your first opportunity to acquire something and then show up? And what did it look like?
I think M&A vocabulary is quite an interesting way to phrase it, because I quite often think of it as it's like learning a new language where you might understand a few words, but you can't speak it. And I kind of felt a bit like that in the sense of I understand most of what they're saying. I haven't done a deal. That wasn't that I have to do a deal, but it did whet my appetite in terms of, I think that agency learning, like I said, in terms of those ups and downs at different stages are very interlinked in terms of personal and professional. And I think I reached a point in my career where I realized I'm no longer an SEO practitioner. I'm no longer a sales leader within an agency. And actually, how do I then evolve that through to, it might be an agency leadership role, a coach within the business for our leadership team. And the next step, so almost selfishly from my perspective of how do I keep this interesting, was how do I do something new? And it has to make perfect sense for the agency. It's got to be aligned with our ambition and objectives. I can't just go off and do something crazy and then we end up losing a load of money from it. But I think if there's like a Venn diagram there of what's exciting and what's valuable in terms of where I could be focusing my efforts, M&A was very high on that list. Going back, I think 2015, 2016, off the top of my head, we did an acquihire deal, brought in 5 or 6 people, 6 or 7 clients, and did a deal with that agency founder where we paid almost a commission structure for clients that were coming through for a period of time, which off the top of my head, I think it was a higher percentage year 1. And then if they renewed beyond that, we'd pay them into year 2 at a lower level commission. And he can walk away from that agency and make sure that everyone in terms of people have new homes, clients have the same people working on their accounts essentially. And that was quite an interesting deal that in some ways fell on our lap. But equally, I think at the back of my mind, it's kind of like, well, if we've done that before and that helped us in terms of growth, why don't we actively pursue doing something like this? And like I mentioned, that 2019 low point, we'd gone into maybe naively running the business to a certain extent into having a clear business plan, creating cash flow, and that profit over years had started to build up into a fairly healthy balance sheet. And then it was a case of, well, we don't want to earn 3% interest on this. Why don't we look at how we can use this to leverage the next level of growth?
So you were gifted with your first acquisition being a low-risk acquihire deal, where the founder wanted to transition their team and their clients to a good home and go do something else. That is a very lucky first deal to get, Kevin.
I think it goes back to what I was saying of just keeping close relationships with competitors. It was like I don't really see anyone as being 100% direct competitors, because there's differences in positioning and what you do. And the reality is, if we pitch for a new piece of business, quite often it's not always the same faces every time. You might get a couple, but in general, you probably have less competitors than you really think. And I think you can learn a lot more. And this was just over, I think it was a coffee where it's just an honest conversation. And in this case, this person wasn't enjoying running that business. They had ideas of going, kind of taking time off, traveling, and then going independent in terms of being a consultant without the stress, if you like, of spinning lots of plates of managing people and clients. It's not for everyone. And that's fine. And that conversation turned into, well, we want to win new clients. And if we win new clients, we'll hire new people. And maybe we could fast track what we're trying to do and help you out. And it just felt like a natural conversation that came together very quickly. But like I say, it maybe fell on our lap, but at the same time, I think it was one of those that is good to take action on, and felt like in hindsight doing that deal, not everything from that deal worked out, but enough of it felt like it took us forward.
So Kevin's now evolving. He's going from SEO practitioner to agency owner to agency leader to coach mentor. to opportunistic deal maker, and now capital allocator. What does thinking like a capital allocator actually mean to you in relation to the current business and then the next acquisition you did?
So it's thinking about where the biggest opportunities are for us in terms of growth that are realistic in terms of what it would take to get there, the funding required, then being able to prioritize and turn that into a plan. So I think certainly last year it was very much about, we've got, like I say, a decent amount of cash in the bank. Everyone will always want that number to be stronger, but it felt like there's enough that we had that we could use that for something outside of what we were doing day to day. And I think it was then just going on a journey of understanding. We'd worked with an M&A advisor who, like I say, initially, I think those conversations were around how do we build ourselves in terms of a point where we can exit. And like I say, during that journey of probably enjoying it a bit more, it was like, well, actually, let's park that. How do we continue and how do we carry on and maybe, use some of that cash to grow? And then it was then, like I say, a series of conversations, strategic workshops, talking to different people, being open-minded, but with a direction of where we wanted to go, what we wanted to bring in, and then taking it forward from there, really.
And that takes us to your first true acquisition. So you sound like you've earned the seat at the table to be taken seriously as a prospective buyer. You have a clear vision of what you're looking to achieve. You have some cash on the balance sheet you want to deploy that gives you inorganic growth. Walk us through how this deal showed up and what did you ultimately acquire?
We started working with, like I say, an M&A advisor before that was really working on our growth in terms of a board advisor, making sure that, like I say, we've got the right strategy. But his background is very much in M&A. He helped us to create a shortlist that we worked on together in terms of agencies that we felt we would like to talk to. Actually, a step before that is we went to clients and we surveyed them and we said if we were to launch a new service, what would you pay money for? And obviously you don't know until they're actually paying money for it, but you can get a sense of, okay, well, what would they be most receptive for out of surveying our clients? We found digital PR was the one that came out on top. And there were a few others as well in terms of what might be helpful. And like I say, that gave us a bit of a plan of, okay, well, where do we start? And I put things in, I don't know if you came across this for the Anshoff matrix, and it reviews things in terms of like opportunity and risk. And one of the things that we decided not to do and rule out, which I think is equally as important in strategy, was we didn't want to do a UK SEO agency deal. That's what we do. Growth strategy in that space is let's focus on a sales and marketing engine and grow that way and win new clients. It doesn't make sense for us to do an acquisition. We also didn't want a turnaround project. There were quite a lot of deals that came our way from struggling agencies that felt like it wasn't a good fit when we looked under the hood in terms of people, clients, and like I say, it felt like it was quite risky in terms of we might be able to turn that around. Potentially the damage was done and it didn't feel like it was, like I say, we wanted to build or buy a thriving agency that we could then work together. So we ruled out UK SEO agencies. We ruled out doing an overseas agency that would do a different service. At that stage we kept in was we might go overseas, but it would be SEO. So let's say we did the US for SEO, that would be on the table. And the other was let's stick to the UK, but let's do a new service. So it's complementary as a cross sell. And that's what we felt was the best opportunity as our starting point. And digital PR came out on top. So we shortlisted agencies within digital PR space and had a number of conversations off the back of that to understand where people were at. And then kind of went through that process of discussions and seeing who had the appetite for our journey. And then really kind of understood a lot more about, like I say, I was probably learning whilst doing this. Okay, well, what does the modeling look like? How do we make this happen?
What I hear you saying is go to your clients, say, what would you like us to offer that we don't currently offer now to help justify a strategic thesis for your go-to-market? And then once you've done that, really narrow on, okay, what's the right fit for us in certain markets, our goals, generate a short list, and then reach out. Was it you reaching out, or was your M&A advisor reaching out on your behalf?
Yeah, the advisor had someone that worked with them that did the initial outreach and actually the initial phone calls. So it was kind of, I think at that stage, they probably didn't even say who we were at that point. It was just getting an appetite of if people would be up for a conversation. And if they were, then they'd have that conversation, they'd tell them who we were and ask if they'd like an introduction and then take that forward. So they were kind of vetted both ways, if you like. So people had a chance to understand a bit more before we got kind of put into that situation.
That's great.
I think that really helped.
Oh, for sure. What you talked about learning M&A. So you're going back to business school here. And what were some of the things that you didn't know about M&A because you sat at the sell side that becoming a buyer taught you?
I think there's a lot on the finance side, which, like I say, going back to that 2012 moment of what I say, exiting an agency, you could class it as that, but it's really like a divorce and a split of two agencies into, wait a minute, if you buy an agency, you don't have to pay all of the money for a valuation and a multiple up front. And actually you can, like in this case, we've done a deal where the founder will stay and help to grow the business together. And there's I think for me, one of the big things is it's not so much based on past performance. That's part of it. A lot of it is you're buying the future performance. That's what becomes your business. And it's a confidence in the forecast and being able to then look at that in terms of where that value lies, and also the valuation models of what does this mean? So how much do you have to use in cash? Do you release some equity in terms of, like, we created a group structure? How much do you pay up front versus over a deferred period or an earnout structure? Like, there's all, like I say, there's no single way of doing these deals. That's probably one of my biggest learnings. And I think there's ways to make them work for both sides that hopefully, like, I'm not sure if these deals are ever 100% perfect for both sides, but I think they're close enough that you do a deal and it feels like it's a bit like if you have a performance-based model with a client, it's directionally correct enough that this feels like the right thing to do. I think the big thing for me was getting my head around the value creation, because like I say, we've never had funding. We still don't have funding in terms of the way that we've done this. And it was getting my head around, we're spending cash in order to create capital value and share value, but our bank balance is going down. That feels like a negative that in my head is backwards until you really understand the modeling of, okay, well, over time, that cash flow, like I say, will build up, and it's looking at this over a longer time frame. And equally, I read quite a few books whilst on this journey. I don't know if you've come across Brad Jacobs, who, again, has done much bigger deals. You're talking, I think he's built $8 billion companies in terms of like floating them, but it's kind of like more back of a napkin style rather than granular spreadsheet. And we have all the granular spreadsheets, but the back of the napkin style is, are you acquiring something where there's a bit of a multiple arbitrage of you pay, let's say, 4 times, you're then valued at 6 times or something like that in terms of what that looks like. And then what does that cash flow look like in terms of that moving forward? And like I say, like, it doesn't have to work out 100%. Or like you can get lost in the spreadsheet. If you can't understand it on the back of a napkin, I feel like that's where the issues come. So I think for me, getting my head around the very top level side of things was really important to then say, okay, well, now we can get into the spreadsheet because we understand the fundamentals of this. But yeah, I think there was a lot of, like I say, trying to understand the financial gain you would get from doing a deal like this. And the more you understand it, the more you can then say, okay, now we can assess the risk versus the reward and what that looks like in the future.
It's such a wonderful progression. You go from being anti the finance, you're not the business side of the business, you're the technical side. You step out on your own, you're like, oh, well, there's this whole other area I do have to be responsible for. You grow and you start mastering that from running a company. And then you start doing M&A and learning about, rather than short-term measurement of financial performance, how do I build enterprise value in cash flows that compound? You've experienced all the journey, Kevin. You just, the last bit's going to be selling at some point. That's the only thing you have left to experience because you've gone through the journey, soup to nuts.
Yeah, and I think it's kept me going because, like I say, I've done this in 20. Like for me, there's certainly, so I've heard other people say this as well, but there's certainly something in You kind of have to reinvent yourself every 7 years or so in terms of what's the next thing. And like I said, that's probably gone from an SEO practitioner through to sales and marketing, through to agency leadership. And maybe this is like the next stage, if you like, in terms of, capital allocation and growth. And that's kept me excited. And I do think that's underrated. Some people I think, again, you can be too lost in the spreadsheet of what's the right thing to do so that number looks better. But I don't feel like my brain works like that. I'm kind of much more, what am I excited about? And that's going to be the most successful option. If I'm not excited about it, it's not going to work.
I find that to be a common disposition of agency owner. To be an agency owner is to voluntarily have problems thrown at you constantly that you have to solve. And it's very similar to an M&A capacity. You just have to be okay with the level of uncertainty and confidence in your ability to create the solution for it. And doing a deal is not too different. What did you learn about running a business, integrating a team by acquiring Root Digital?
I think it's really interesting just to see how there's absolutely no right or wrong way of running a business. There's different ways to do it. I think for us, what we wanted to do was to bring in something where we felt like the culture was aligned. And again, that's not going to be 100% aligned. I don't feel like that's possible in terms of certainly day one. We're both remote agencies. That's something, again, I don't think we had a strict, we have to be remote, but we certainly highly weighted. If we're going to acquire an agency, it would make the integration easier if we both had remote structures. Then I think, like I said, I don't think we've cracked all of this. I think we're in the middle of some of it, but it's that balance of autonomy versus, well, actually, what can we bring to the table that helps us move forward? So how do we combine sales and marketing efforts in a way that can help to attract the types of clients that we want to win? Are there efficiencies in the way that we do things both sides that everyone can learn from? I think because it's our first deal, there's been probably a bit more watch and learn style. How do we have some shared clients and work side by side? I know some that operate, like I say, the private equity backed ones, where they might even day one say, okay, well, you're part of our brand now, you're integrated in our team. But they've done a number of deals before to get to that point that, it's probably all very well documented, and this is what's gone wrong, this is what works, in order to give them the confidence to make those changes quicker.
To smash them together. Yeah. Put it more explicitly. You referenced doing the group model. Can you unpack that and what led to you deciding not to merge and really running a group model?
Yes. So funnily enough, I mentioned on our leadership team chat last week, I want to ban the word group. And the reason for that is I see the group model as being a legal entity. And it's a way that, again, like you've got corporate structure maybe behind what you're doing. You can keep separate P&Ls, and obviously there's ways around that anyway. But I think for me, it's more the internal structure of the companies. I don't like the word group from the perspective of, again, different ways of doing this. I know there's very successful holdco models that keep agencies within a group and they keep their own brand and autonomy. And I'm not against that model. I think that works for them. I think for us over the long term, we actually see value in having one strong single brand and then bringing that together. But like I say, we're probably a bit slower versus some of the ones that do that as an overnight shift. Like I say, and the reason I banned the word group is, firstly, I don't think we're big enough to externally be called a group. We're 30 or so people. And I think there's more strength in saying we're one strong brand as opposed to a group of multiple companies. And internally, one of our values is one team. And to me, the word group feels like, well, actually, no, that's two teams. So I want it to, again, Brad Jacobs is something I picked up just from reading around this. But one thing that he said is, I want this to look and feel like we haven't done an acquisition from the inside and out. That's where I want to get to. We could have grown this organically and it would look and feel exactly the same, externally, internally, to clients and our team. I just don't expect that to be an overnight thing, because I think we'd break a lot of things if we were to try and do that.
Yeah, and it was your first one.
Right, exactly.
And so the probability of you creating a successful outcome by smashing two companies together and figuring it out is rather low. So you're doing the practical, sensible thing, which is taking your time, being patient, coming up with a strategy, thinking through value. I do want to make sure people understand the size of the two companies, because when when they're sitting in your seat, Kevin, they go, oh, I can't do M&A because of XYZ. And I'm too small, or I don't have enough cash, or I don't know who would sell me the business. They make a lot of excuses. What were some of the things that you had as your current situation in the business, and how big was the company you acquired?
Yeah, so like I say, like there's different ways to do this. And I think it probably is attractive for agencies of a certain size where I think this is a good example where in the UK, I certainly believe that, and I'm sure it's the same in the US, but maybe different numbers, you can get to £1 million worth of revenue as a agency founder where largely everyone else is billable in terms of resource, and you don't necessarily need a senior leadership team. The challenge is it's a juggling act. So that agency leader is doing sales, marketing, finance, account management for key accounts, some of the work, like basically spinning lots of plates. And I think in order to go from that, say, £1 million revenue to 2 million, 3 million, you need a senior leadership team. You're going to have a drop in profitability because you're going to have non-billable roles and infrastructure and everything else. It just means you can't make the types of margin that you could up until that point. And I think there's a lot of people where it's kind of like, okay, well, do I go on that journey of doing that myself, or actually is this the right time to say, let's join? Or we said a group. I feel like I banned that word now, so I can't say that. But, like actually jump on someone else's train a little bit in terms of, okay, we can become a part of this. And they've got the leadership team. They've got a bit more process and sales and marketing engine and all of that in terms of the next step figured out. How do we combine forces and then take that to the next level? So going back to your question about firstly where we were at, we'd, I think previous year done around £2 million in revenue, about 20 people. So that typical kind of 100K per head agency model. And Root in terms of revenue were kind of just under $1 million in terms of where they were at. I think it's more like 700K, and strong profits, like I described in terms of, kind of that model of what they've done to get to that point and combining forces. I think with looking at that, we're now kind of north of 3 million revenue, call it $4 million in terms of scale. So like I say, I don't think M&A is always the answer or naturally the answer. We're still relatively small, but equally that was a nice way for us to take a jump, let's say $3 million to $4 million. And then you can see a path to, if we were to want to do this again, you can see again what we could do by doing these types of deals and how you could bring that together over time.
I think that's a nice transition to closing, which is what's next for Kevin here. Over the next 5 years, we have AI influencing a lot of discussions and opportunities within the sector, and then a lot of businesses that are looking to join groups or to team up or to exit to maximize a business. What's the plan for Kevin and the team moving forward?
So I always like to have something big to work towards, almost like as a annual goal of something new. Like M&A was definitely that piece last year. This year, it felt like if you'd have asked me a year ago, I might be like, oh yeah, we'd do a deal every year, or like I can see how we would do 2 or 3. And this year has been much more, actually, let's not do a deal. It's not that I'm put off by ever doing this again. It's much more, let's make the deal that we've done work. Let's look at what that looks like of where's the opportunity on the table. So we're doing more work in the US. So I kind of almost see it as the big activity that we're doing is stacking and improving our chances of making what we've got work. So the US is a organic growth plan at this stage in terms of what we're looking to do. And you just mentioned it, AI. It's like actually rewriting a lot of our workflows, and how does that go into how we operate as an agency that is very different in terms of what that landscape has looked like before. It feels like we need to get the other side of those 3 things. And then once we are the other side of those 3 things, it might then be a case of, you know what, there's an opportunity to grow further, and how do we fast track that? And maybe an acquisition is on the table and might be something that we explore again, and certainly open-minded. But I don't feel like it's, at this stage, I almost feel like it can be dangerous to have everything mapped out, if that makes sense, in terms of what comes after that piece.
Yeah, the future's a guess. It's not guaranteed.
Of course.
I want to comment on your path forward. Do you feel like you're reverting out of the capital allocator position by focusing on organic expansion, integrating the team? Does it feel like you're, making a different decision on where you sit in regards to intervention and involvement?
I think some of it has brought me back into the business as opposed to that kind of working on the business versus in the business. I think some of it has brought me back into it, but like I say, in a agency leadership role, but I still do see one of the core objectives or core responsibilities I have is capital allocation. So actually spending that money on a US growth plan is a big part of that. What we do in terms of AI, budgeting wise, and how do we make that happen? Again, I think it's just like I said, the M&A for me isn't the only tool in terms of capital allocation.
Yeah.
It's still looking at it through that lens. And that's why I would say M&A would be on the table again in the future. I think it's still something that's very relevant. And it's clearly now I've seen this is, like I say, kind of the opportunity in terms of how to make that work.
If I'm listening to this and I'm in the US as an agency owner, I'm like, Kevin, you should acquire me in your global expansion. What's the best way for that person to reach out to you?
I mean, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I'd say, yeah, drop me a message. Like I say, I'm always happy to have conversations, even if it's just to share advice and speak with like-minded people. And yeah, I'm more than happy to do that.
Kevin, thank you for being so giving and so transparent about the journey. There's so many people who are like you at all the stages of this agency journey you've been on, and this has been an invaluable resource. So thank you, Kevin.
More than happy to do that. Thank you, Peter.
If you like this episode, probably like one of our other episodes. Click here.